Hello and welcome to Issues, the news magazine that makes Dateline NBC look like a pancreas. I'm sorry, I meant 60 Minutes. Tonight, Issues takes a hard look at a contemporary phenomenon which is nearly impossible to explain, but human interest drives us to try and understand this complex, difficult story facing the world today. Tonight, Issues takes a hard look at why exactly men like lesbians so much. We now go out to the field where Brian is standing by. Brian?
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I'm standing in this vacant lot trying to figure out why men love lesbians so much. Men seem to have no idea.
Well, Brian, it tastes good.
It's less filling. I've never seen racist though.
The service was excellent.
And while men are wafted along in happy agreement, women are left out in the cold. Brian?
Thanks, Brian. Now, Mrs. O'Brien, how did the incident make you feel?
It was horrible. I came home and there was a note taped to the refrigerator. It said, honey, we're out of milk. How could he do such a thing to me? His wife of 16 years.
As you can see, the human cost is devastating.
Thank you, Brian. Here at Issues, the panorama that makes All in the Family look like Mad About You, we've talked to top scientists about the problem. With me now, via satellite uplink, are Professor Brian of the University of Southern Switzerland and Dr. Brian of the University of West Dakota. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Brian.
Professor Brian, let me start with you. You've been working on this issue for quite some time. What have you discovered?
Well, Brian, we here in the Lesbian Science Department have made several major breakthroughs in the past several months. Firstly, we've solved no fewer than 4 Sudoku puzzles. Secondly, we have found that lesbians, or womenatum lesbinatum, emit a very severe sort of gas, the main molecule of which, lesboxide, shown here, when administered to lab rats, causes them to eat cheese, run around in their cages, and learn karate in one case.
Thank you, Professor Brian. I'm pretty sure nothing about you is interesting.
Our own Brian was able to do some actual field research. Brian?
Thank you, Brian. I was in the field for well over 3 months, and I was only able to chance upon one meeting between these two species. Notice how both the man and the lesbian have fully formed exoskeletons, indicating that they are both mature and ready for mating.
So, you're a lesbian?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Good luck with that.
Thanks.
Brian has analyzed this footage. Brian?
Thank you, Brian. Well, I spent over 1.5 years analyzing this footage, and I have concluded that Brian was right in his analysis. Brian?
Thank you, Brian. I agree with Brian.
Thank you, Brian. It seems obvious that this conclusion is correct. But what does it mean, Brian?
Brian?
Brian.
Professor Brian.
Professor Brian? Oh, that's me. Well, it's conclusive.
Well, you're wrong. Brian?
Brian.
Thank you, Brian. I asked Brian to ask a lesbian what she thought. Brian?
Thank you, Brian. I've spent over 5.5 years asking lesbians about things. We happen to have one in the studio. Now, she's asked to remain anonymous. So, we're just gonna call her, Brian. Okay, Brian, thank you for coming on this program.
Thank you, Brian. Well, personally, Brian, I disagree.
Why? Why in the face of such overwhelming evidence?
Well, the thing is, it's a little too early to make conclusions. We only discovered the lesbian 4 months ago in New Guinea, and personally, I think we need to research a little more before we make any decisive conclusions.
Very controversial indeed. Brian?
Thank you, Brian. Well, I spent 12 years in the Ardennes, and let me just say, I know a lot about things. I managed to capture this video last Wednesday. Notice the man's brightly colored tail feathers meant to scare off predators.
Oh, hey, can I buy you a drink?
No thanks, lesbian.
Oh, okay, cool. I think we met before, though. I'm Brian.
Oh, hi, I'm a lesbian.
Very telling indeed, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. I have spent over 37 years in the Antarctic, and I think that it is clear from the video footage that lesbians, like camels, need very little water to survive harsh conditions. Perhaps it is this functionality that draws men to lesbians. Brian?
Thanks, Brian. I've assembled a panel of men to ask them. Do you agree with Brian?
Well, Brian, I don't know what a camel is.
I agree with Brian. It's the inflation rate. I don't agree, Brian. I think they need to trade for more pitching.
I am afraid of penguins. Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Professor Brian, any last words?
Well, we need to confront this problem before any more lives are lost. The future is now.
Actually, Professor, the future was 11 minutes ago.
In all my 168 years of hosting this program, I've never seen anything quite like this. Is there time to confront this problem? I don't know. But I do know that we'll need all the manpower the world can muster. So be sure to join us next week at Issues, as Brian will tell us about the latest fads in dentistry, while Brian will be over in Beijing telling us why the Chinese can't get enough KFC. So for Brian, Professor Brian, Dr. Brian, our producer Brian, our director Brian, Brian Dennehy, Conan O'Brien, Brian Adams, and Johann Strauss, this is Brian over here at Issues saying, good night, Moon.